The summer sun blazed down on the Texas frontier in 1878, casting long shadows across the dusty plains near Fort Griffin. 8-year-old Lily Catherine Morgan wiped the sweat from her forehead as she chased her pet rabbit, Snowball, through the tall grass behind their family's cabin. Her mother had warned her 100 times not to wander too far, but Snowball had other plans that morning. The little white rabbit zigzagged through the mesquite bush, its cottontail flashing like a beacon as Lily stumbled after it. Her bare feet found every sharp rock and thorny branch, but she pressed on. Snowball was more than just a pet. He was her best friend on this lonely frontier where neighbors lived miles apart. "Snowball, come back here right now," she called out, her voice carrying across the empty landscape. But the rabbit seemed determined to lead her on the chase of her life. As Lily pushed through a thick patch of brush, the ground suddenly dropped away beneath her feet. She tumbled down a small slope, landing with a soft thud in a hidden canyon she had never seen before. Dust swirled around her as she sat up, rubbing her scraped elbow. The walls of the canyon rose up on both sides, creating a secret pocket in the earth that felt like another world entirely. Snowball sat perfectly still at the bottom of the canyon, as if he had been waiting for her all along. But as Lily stood up to grab him, something else caught her eye. There, in the shadow of a large rocky overhang, lay the still form of a person. Her heart began to pound. Every story her parents had told her about dangerous outlaws and hostile Indians flooded back into her mind. She should run. She should scream. She should do anything except walk closer to investigate. But something about the way the person lay so still made her feet move forward instead of backward. As she crept closer, Lily could see it was a young man, maybe not much older than her teenage brother back east. His skin was bronzed by the sun, and his long black hair was braided with colorful beads and feathers. He wore buckskin clothing decorated with intricate patterns that seemed to tell stories in thread and leather. This was a Comanche warrior, one of the very people her father had warned her about countless times during their evening talks by the fire. "They're fierce fighters," he would say. "They know this land better than we do, and they don't take kindly to settlers moving into their territory." But lying there unconscious, the warrior didn't look fierce at all. He looked hurt and helpless. A massive boulder had somehow shifted and trapped his left leg, pinning him to the ground. His face was pale beneath his tan, and she could see beads of sweat on his forehead despite the shade near his head. A beautiful painted horse stood perfectly still, as if keeping watch over his fallen rider. The horse's eyes were intelligent and sad, and Lily felt like the animal was trying to tell her something important. The warrior's breathing was shallow and labored. Even at her young age, Lily could tell he was in serious trouble. The boulder was far too heavy for one person to move, and from the smell in the air, she suspected his leg wound had become infected. Every instinct told her to run home and tell her father. But she also knew what would happen then. Her father would either ignore the situation entirely, or worse, he might see the warrior as a threat to be eliminated rather than a person who needed help. Lily had been raised to believe that all people were children of God, regardless of what they looked like or where they came from. Her grandmother, who had passed away the previous winter, had always told her that kindness was the most important thing in the world. "Sometimes, little one," her grandmother would say while they picked wildflowers together, "we have to choose between what's easy and what's right. Always choose what's right, even when it scares you." Standing in that hidden canyon with an unconscious Comanche warrior at her feet and her pet rabbit watching nearby, Lily faced the biggest choice of her young life. She knelt down beside the warrior and gently touched his forehead. His skin was burning with fever, and he didn't respond to her touch at all. His leg, trapped beneath the boulder, looked swollen and angry. She had seen similar injuries on farm animals, and she knew infection could kill if left untreated. Looking around the canyon, she noticed a small spring bubbling up from between some rocks. The water looked clear and clean, perfect for helping someone with a fever. She had brought her father's old canteen with her on the rabbit chase, and now she filled it with the cool spring water. Carefully, she lifted the warrior's head and dribbled a few drops of water between his lips. At first, nothing happened. Then his throat moved slightly as he swallowed by instinct. She gave him a little more water, and this time his eyelids fluttered slightly. The warrior's horse watched everything she did with intelligent eyes. Occasionally, snorting softly as if approving of her efforts. Lily had always been good with animals, and something about the horse's behavior told her that this warrior was a good person. Animals, her grandmother had taught her, were excellent judges of character. As the afternoon wore on, Lily realized she had been gone far too long. Her parents would be worried sick, and if they came looking for her, they might find this hidden place. She couldn't let that happen, not yet. The warrior needed time to heal, and she needed time to figure out how to help him properly. Before leaving, she managed to rig up a small shelter using her apron and some fallen branches. Creating shade over the warrior's face and upper body, she left the rest of the water from her canteen within his reach, though she doubted he was conscious enough to drink it on his own. "I'll be back," she whispered to the unconscious man, even though she knew he couldn't hear her. "I promise I won't let you die here alone." The climb out of the canyon was much harder than falling into it had been. By the time she reached the top with Snowball tucked under her arm, the sun was beginning to set. She ran all the way home, her mind racing with plans and possibilities. Her mother met her at the door, relief and anger warring on her face. "Lily Catherine Morgan, where on earth have you been?" "We've been worried sick." "I'm sorry, Mama," Lily panted, setting Snowball down gently. "He led me on quite a chase today." "I got turned around and lost track of time." Her father looked up from his evening pipe. "You know better than to wander off like that, little girl. This frontier is full of dangers you can't even imagine." If only he knew, Lily thought to herself. If only he knew that she had just made a discovery that would change everything. But she said nothing, simply nodded and helped her mother prepare supper. That night, as she lay in her small bed listening to the coyotes howl in the distance, Lily stared up at the rough wooden ceiling and made her plans. Tomorrow, she would return to the hidden canyon with supplies. She would find a way to help the warrior, even if it meant keeping the biggest secret of her life outside her window. The stars seemed brighter than usual, as if the universe itself was holding its breath to see what would happen next. The rooster's crow barely reached Lily's ears before she was already awake, her heart pounding with anticipation and worry. She had spent most of the night tossing and turning, wondering if the warrior was still alive in that hidden canyon. Every coyote howl had made her wonder if wild animals had found him during the long, dark hours. She dressed quietly in the pre-dawn darkness, careful not to wake her parents in the next room. Her plan was simple but risky. She would tell her mother she was going to pick berries for breakfast, something she did often during the summer months. It would give her a perfect excuse to be gone for several hours. In the kitchen, she gathered supplies with the stealth of a seasoned spy. A small loaf of her mother's fresh bread went into her basket, along with some dried meat, a jar of honey, and strips of clean cloth her mother used for bandages. She also grabbed a small bottle of the willow bark tea her grandmother had taught her to make. It was bitter as anything, but it worked wonders for pain and fever. Her mother found her in the kitchen, just as the sun was beginning to peek over the horizon. "My goodness, Lily, you're up early this morning," she said, stretching and yawning. "I wanted to get to the berry patch before it gets too hot, Mama," Lily replied, trying to keep her voice steady. "The best ones are always gone by midday." Her mother smiled and ruffled her daughter's hair. "That's my thoughtful girl. Just be careful out there, and don't go wandering off like yesterday." Your father was ready to organize a search party. Lily nodded solemnly, guilt twisting in her stomach like a snake. She hated lying to her parents, but she knew they would never understand. To them, helping a Comanche warrior would be like helping a dangerous wild animal, impossible and foolish. The walk to the hidden canyon felt both endless and too short. With every step, Lily wondered what she would find. Would the warrior be awake? Would he be afraid of her? Would he even be alive at all? When she finally reached the edge of the canyon and looked down, relief flooded through her entire body. The warrior was still there, still breathing, and amazingly, he was awake. His dark eyes followed her movements as she carefully made her way down the rocky slope. Though he didn't try to speak or move, his horse nickered softly when it saw her, as if greeting an old friend. Lily found this encouraging. If the horse trusted her, maybe the warrior would too. "Hello," she said softly as she approached, though she knew he probably couldn't understand her words. "I brought you some food and medicine?" The warrior's eyes were alert but cautious. She could see the intelligence behind them, and also the pain. His fever seemed to have broken during the night, which was a good sign. But his trapped leg looked even worse than before. Lily knelt beside him and showed him the bread, breaking off a small piece and eating it herself to demonstrate that it was safe. The warrior watched her carefully, then nodded slightly. When she offered him a piece, he ate it slowly, never taking his eyes off her face. The water from yesterday was gone, so she refilled his makeshift cup from the spring and helped him drink. This time he was strong enough to lift his head on his own, though the effort clearly exhausted him. Over the next hour, Lily tried to assess the situation with his trapped leg. The boulder was massive, probably 3 times her own weight. She tried pushing it from different angles, but it wouldn't budge even an inch. However, she noticed something important. The ground around the boulder was soft and sandy. Maybe, instead of moving the boulder, she could dig away the ground underneath his leg. Using a flat piece of stone as a makeshift shovel, Lily began the slow, careful process of scooping away dirt and sand from around the warrior's trapped limb. It was exhausting work, and several times she had to stop to rest, but gradually she began to make progress. The warrior watched her work with growing amazement. Here was a white child, one of the people his own tribe considered enemies, working tirelessly to free him from his rocky prison. When she paused to wipe sweat from her forehead, he spoke a single word in his own language that she didn't understand, but his tone was gentle and grateful. By midday, Lily had managed to create a small tunnel under the boulder. It wasn't big enough to free his leg completely, but it was a start. The warrior seemed to understand what she was trying to do, and he began helping by pushing against the boulder from his end whenever she worked on loosening the dirt. "Tomorrow," she told him, pointing to the sun and then to the horizon to indicate the passage of time. "I'll come back tomorrow and we'll get you out of there." The warrior nodded, and for the first time since she had found him, he smiled. It was a small smile, filled with pain, but also with something that looked like hope. Before leaving, Lily carefully applied some of the clean cloth bandages to a cut on his forehead, using movements she had seen her mother use when treating injuries. The warrior held perfectly still, allowing her to work. Though she could tell it hurt, she also managed to communicate that she was leaving food and water for him. By pointing to the supplies and then to him and making eating motions, she was able to make her meaning clear. The warrior nodded and spoke several words in his own language. Though she couldn't understand them, his tone told her he was saying thank you. The climb out of the canyon was even harder after a morning of digging, but Lily's spirits were high. The warrior was alive, alert, and they were making progress on freeing his leg. More importantly, she could tell he was beginning to trust her. She arrived home with her basket, half full of berries she had hastily picked on the way back. Her mother was pleased with the harvest and didn't ask too many questions about why she looked so tired and dirty. That evening at dinner, her father talked about some cattle that had gone missing from a neighbor's ranch. "Probably Comanche raiders," he said, shaking his head grimly. "They've been more active lately. We might need to organize some kind of patrol." Lily's blood ran cold. If her father and the other men started patrolling the area regularly, they might discover the hidden canyon. She had to work faster. The second day followed much the same pattern, except this time Lily brought a small metal spoon from the kitchen to help with her digging. The work went faster, and by afternoon she had created enough space under the boulder that the warrior could actually move his legs slightly. On the third day, something wonderful happened. As Lily worked on the final stages of freeing his leg, the warrior began trying to help more actively. Together, they managed to create enough room for him to slowly, carefully pull his injured leg out from under the boulder. The moment his leg came free, the warrior let out a long breath that sounded like he had been holding it for days. His leg was badly bruised and swollen, but as far as Lily could tell, it wasn't broken. The infection that had worried her was also looking much better thanks to the willow bark tea and clean bandages. For the first time since she had found him, the warrior was able to sit up properly. He looked at Lily with eyes full of gratitude and spoke several sentences in his own language. Though she couldn't understand the words, his meaning was crystal clear. He was thanking her for saving his life, but their relief was short-lived. As Lily packed up her supplies to head home, she heard something that made her heart stop, the distant sound of men's voices calling her name. Her father had finally decided to come looking for her. And he wasn't alone. The warrior heard the voices too, and his expression immediately changed from gratitude to alarm. He understood the danger they were both in if the white settlers found him here with their daughter. There would be violence. Lots of it. Lily's mind raced. She had to get home before her father reached the canyon, and the warrior needed time to get away on his horse. But with his injured leg, could he even ride? Time was running out, and their secret was about to be discovered. The voices of the search party faded into the distance, and Lily's heart slowly returned to its normal rhythm. She had managed to slip away from the canyon just in time, emerging from the brush with her berry basket as her father and 3 other men approached from the opposite direction. "There you are, little one," her father had said, relief evident in his voice. "We were starting to worry when you didn't come home for lunch." "I'm sorry, Papa," she had replied, showing him her basket of berries. "I found a really good patch today and lost track of time." That had been 2 days ago, and now Lily was making her way back to the hidden canyon for what had become her daily visit. The warrior, who she had started thinking of as her secret friend, was healing remarkably. Well, his leg was still tender, but the swelling had gone down considerably, and he could now stand and walk short distances with the help of a walking stick he had carved from a fallen branch. What amazed Lily most was how quickly they had begun to understand each other despite speaking completely different languages. It had started with simple gestures, pointing to things and saying their names in their respective languages. The warrior would point to the sun and say something that sounded like Tab, so Lily would repeat the word and then say sun in return. Within days, they had developed their own unique way of communicating that combined words, hand signals, drawings in the dirt, and a lot of patience. The warrior was remarkably good at this game, and Lily suspected he was much smarter than many of the adults back at the settlement gave his people credit for. She learned that his name was something that sounded like Ayana, which he explained through gestures meant eternal blossom. When she told him her name was Lily, he smiled and made flower motions with his hands, seeming pleased that they both had names connected to growing things. Ayana taught her practical things too. He showed her which plants in the canyon were good for medicine and which ones were dangerous. Using drawings in the sandy ground, he explained how to read animal tracks and predict weather changes by watching cloud patterns. He demonstrated how to move silently through brush without disturbing the wildlife, skills that amazed Lily with their precision. In return, Lily shared stories about her life at the settlement. She drew pictures of her family's cabin, their farm, animals, and her parents. Ayana was particularly fascinated by her drawings of her mother's garden, and through gestures and broken words, he managed to ask questions about how they grew their vegetables and preserved food for winter. One afternoon, as they sat by the small spring sharing pieces of cornbread Lily had brought, Ayana began telling her a story. He couldn't use many English words yet, but his hands painted pictures in the air as he spoke in his own language. From his gestures and expressions, Lily understood he was telling her about his family, his mother, his younger sister, and his grandfather who had taught him to ride horses. The story took a sad turn when Ayana's face grew serious and his gestures became more urgent. Through drawings in the sand, he showed her that he had been searching for buffalo herds that had moved far from their usual grazing grounds. His people were hungry, and he had been riding for days looking for signs of the great animals. When his horse had stumbled and thrown him against the rocks, Lily's heart ached as she realized that Ayana's people were probably worried sick about him. She tried to ask through gestures how long he had been missing, and from his response she gathered it had been almost a week. Somewhere out there, his family was searching for him, just as her own family would search for her if she disappeared. This realization created a new problem in Lily's mind. Ayana was getting stronger every day, and soon he would be well enough to return to his people. But how could he do that safely? The area around Fort Griffin was crawling with army patrols and settler militias, all of them on high alert for any sign of Comanche activity. Ayana seemed to understand her concerns without her having to explain them. One day, he used sticks and stones to create a map in the dirt, showing her the location of various landmarks around the canyon. He pointed to different areas and used facial expressions and gestures to indicate which places were safe and which were dangerous. Through this crude but effective map, Lily began to understand the complex geography of the frontier from a completely different perspective. To her people, this was wild, dangerous territory that needed to be tamed and controlled. But to Ayana's people, it was home, a carefully known landscape with hidden water sources, safe camping spots, and ancient trails that avoided the areas where white settlers had built their towns. As the days passed, their friendship deepened in ways that surprised them both. Ayana began teaching Lily some of his language, starting with simple words like water, food, and friend. She, in turn, taught him more English words, and slowly they began to have actual conversations, though they were still filled with gestures and drawings to fill in the gaps. One morning, Ayana surprised Lily by presenting her with a small gift he had carved while she was away. It was a tiny wooden horse, no bigger than her thumb, with intricate details carved into its mane and legs. The craftsmanship was incredible, every line was perfect, and the little horse seemed almost alive in her palm. "For me?" she asked, her eyes wide with wonder. Ayana nodded and spoke carefully in broken English. "For Lily, good done." Tears filled her eyes as she realized this was probably the first time anyone had ever given her something made specifically for her by their own hands. Her parents loved her, of course, but they were too busy surviving on the frontier to create special gifts. This tiny horse represented hours of careful work, done out of pure friendship and gratitude. "Thank you," she whispered, holding the carving close to her heart. "I'll treasure it always." In return, Lily gave Ayana something precious to her, a small silver locket that had belonged to her grandmother. It wasn't fancy, just a simple oval piece with a faded picture of her grandmother as a young woman inside. But it was the most valuable thing Lily owned, and she wanted Ayana to have something to remember their friendship by. Ayana accepted the locket with the solemnity of someone receiving a great honor. He held it carefully and spoke several sentences in his own language that Lily somehow knew were words of deep gratitude and respect, but their peaceful days in the hidden canyon were numbered. Ayana was now strong enough to ride, and both of them knew he couldn't stay hidden forever. His people needed to know he was alive, and every day he remained missing increased the chances of conflict between his tribe and the settlers. Moreover, Lily was finding it increasingly difficult to explain her daily absences to her parents. Her mother had started asking more detailed questions about where exactly she was finding all these berries and herbs she brought home. Her father had noticed that she seemed tired and distracted, and he was beginning to watch her more closely. One evening at dinner, her father made an announcement that sent chills down Lily's spine. "I've been talking with Captain Henderson at the fort," he said, cutting his meat with deliberate precision. "There are signs that Comanche scouts have been operating in this area. We're going to start organized patrols, covering every canyon and hiding spot within 5 miles of here." Lily's fork clattered against her plate. "Patrols?" she managed to ask. "That's right," her father continued, not noticing her distress. "We can't have hostile Indians sneaking around our homes and threatening our families. It's time we showed them this territory belongs to civilized people now." That night, Lily lay awake staring at the ceiling, her mind racing with worry and plans. She had to warn Ayana about the patrols, and she had to help him find a safe way back to his people before the soldiers discovered their secret friendship. But deep in her heart, she knew that once Ayana left the canyon, she would probably never see him again. The thought of losing her first real friend, the person who had taught her That the world was much bigger and more complicated than she had ever imagined filled her with a sadness deeper than anything she had ever experienced. Still, she knew what she had to do. Tomorrow she would have to say goodbye to the friend who had changed her life forever, and hope that somehow their paths would cross again in a world that seemed determined to keep their two peoples apart. Dawn broke gray and cloudy on what would become the most dangerous day of Lily's young life. She had barely slept, tossing and turning as she worried about the patrols her father had mentioned. Every creak of the cabin walls had sounded like marching boots, and every bird call outside her window had made her think of warning signals. She dressed quickly and quietly, knowing this might be the last time she could visit Ayana safely. The patrols would begin their sweeps today, and once they started, every canyon and hiding place within miles would be searched thoroughly. Her mother was already in the kitchen, kneading dough for the day's bread. "You're up early again, sweetheart?" she observed, glancing at Lily with tired but loving eyes. "I wanted to get one more good berry picking session in before the weather turns," Lily replied, trying to keep her voice steady. It wasn't entirely a lie. Storm clouds were gathering on the horizon, and the air had that heavy feeling that came before rain. "Well, be careful out there," her mother said, wiping flour from her hands. "Your father says there might be trouble in the area soon." If only she knew how right she was, Lily thought as she grabbed her basket, headed for the door. The walk to the canyon felt different this morning. Every shadow seemed to hide watchers, and every distant sound made her heart race. Twice she had to duck behind bushes when she heard horses in the distance, though they turned out to be false alarms, just neighbors going about their daily business. When she finally reached the edge of the canyon and looked down, she saw that Ayana was already awake and waiting for her. But something was wrong. His horse was saddled and ready to travel, and his few belongings were packed in leather pouches. He looked up at her with eyes full of sadness and determination. "You're leaving," she said as she climbed down to meet him. It wasn't a question. Ayana nodded slowly. In his broken English mixed with gestures, he explained that he had to return to his people. His absence had already put his tribe in danger. They would be searching for him, and that search might bring them into conflict with the white soldiers. "I know," Lily whispered, fighting back tears. "My father told us about patrols starting. Today, it's not safe for you here anymore." They spent the next hour planning Ayana's escape route. Using their stick and stone map system, they identified the safest path through the wilderness that would avoid the areas most likely to be patrolled. Ayana's knowledge of hidden water sources and game trails would help him stay invisible to the search parties, but as they talked and planned, neither of them noticed the approaching danger. High above the canyon rim, two separate groups were converging on their secret meeting place, and neither group had any idea the other existed. From the east came Thomas Morgan, Lily's father, leading 4 armed settlers on horseback. They had started their patrol before dawn, systematically searching every possible hiding spot for signs of hostile Indians. Thomas was particularly concerned about this area because it was close to where cattle had gone missing the previous week. From the west, moving like ghosts through the morning shadows, came 3 Comanche warriors led by a stern-faced man named Runs Like Wind, who was Ayana's older brother. They had been searching for their missing scout for over a week, following cold trails and growing increasingly desperate. Runs Like Wind had refused to give up hope that his younger brother was still alive somewhere down in the canyon. Lily and Ayana were saying their goodbyes. She had given him a small bag of food for his journey, and he had taught her a few more words in his language, words that meant safe journey and until we meet again. "Will I ever see you again?" Lily asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Ayana looked at her with eyes wise beyond his years. In careful English he said, "World very big, but friendship make it smaller." It was then that they heard the first shout from above. Thomas Morgan's voice carried clearly down into the canyon. "Lily Catherine Morgan, are you down there?" Both Lily and Ayana froze. This was the moment they had both been dreading. There was nowhere to run, nowhere to hide, and no way to explain what a white settler's daughter was doing alone with a Comanche warrior. "Stay calm," Lily whispered to Ayana, though her own heart was pounding like a drum. Let me talk to them first. But before she could climb up to meet her father, another voice rang out from the opposite side of the canyon, a voice speaking in rapid, urgent Comanche. Runs Like Wind and his companions had arrived at almost the same moment as the white settlers. The two groups spotted each other across the canyon rim and immediately went into defensive positions. Rifles were raised on the settler side, while the Comanche warriors notched arrows and prepared for battle. The air crackled with tension and the very real possibility of violence down in the canyon. Lily and Ayana looked up in horror at the confrontation developing above them. This was their worst nightmare come true. Their secret friendship was about to trigger exactly the kind of bloodshed they had both hoped to avoid. "Lily!" her father shouted down into the canyon. "Get away from that savage right now?" At the same time, Runs Like Wind called out to his brother in their own language, his voice filled with relief at finding Ayana alive but also confusion and anger at seeing him with an enemy child. "Papa, wait!" Lily called up to her father. "It's not what you think." But Thomas Morgan was already scrambling down into the canyon, his rifle in his hands and fury in his eyes. He had spent sleepless nights worrying about his daughter's safety, and now he found her consorting with one of the very people he considered the greatest threat to his family's survival. Behind him came two of his companions, while the other two remained on the rim with their weapons trained on the Comanche warriors above. The situation was a powder keg waiting to explode. Ayana rose to his feet, moving carefully to avoid any sudden motions that might be seen as threatening. His hand moved instinctively toward the knife at his belt, but then he caught Lily's eye and stopped. Violence would only make things worse for both of them. Runs Like Wind and his warriors were now climbing down the other side of the canyon, moving with the fluid grace of men who had spent their lives in dangerous situations. They were outnumbered by the white men's superior firepower, but they would not abandon Ayana to face this alone. Within moments, the hidden canyon that had been a place of healing and friendship was filled with armed men from two different worlds, all of them ready for a fight. The air was thick with suspicion, fear, and misunderstanding. Thomas Morgan reached the canyon floor and immediately positioned himself between Lily and Ayana, his rifle pointed at the young warrior's chest. "Step away from my daughter," he growled. "Papa, please listen to me," Lily pleaded. But her father's attention was focused entirely on what he saw as a mortal threat. Runs Like Wind and his companions reached the bottom of the canyon from the opposite side, and now the two groups faced each other across a distance of maybe 20 feet. Each side was convinced the other meant harm, and each was prepared to fight to protect their own. In the middle of it all stood Lily and Ayana, a friendship that had bloomed in secret, now exposed to the harsh light of a world that didn't believe such connections were possible. The standoff stretched on for what felt like hours but was probably only seconds. Fingers tightened on triggers. Bowstrings were drawn taut. Everyone waited for someone else to make the first move, and in that moment of perfect, terrible tension, Lily made a decision that would echo through both communities for generations to come. She stepped forward, placing herself directly between the two armed groups, her small arms spread wide, as if she could somehow shield everyone from the violence that seemed inevitable. "Stop!" she cried out in a voice much stronger than anyone would have expected from an 8-year-old girl. "Just stop and listen to me." The canyon fell silent except for the sound of heavy breathing and the distant rumble of approaching thunder. Two cultures stood on the brink of violence, and a child's courage was the only thing standing between them and tragedy. The canyon held its breath. 8-year-old Lily stood in the middle of what could become a battlefield, her small frame trembling but her voice steady as she faced down two groups of armed men who seemed ready to destroy each other. "Papa," she said, looking directly at her father, "please put down your gun and listen to me. This man saved my life." Thomas Morgan's face was a mask of confusion and anger. "Lily, get behind me right now. You don't know what you're saying." "I know exactly what I'm saying," Lily replied with a strength that surprised everyone, including herself. "His name is Ayana, and he's not a savage. He's my friend." On the other side of the canyon, Runs Like Wind spoke sharply to his brother in their own language, clearly demanding to know why Ayana was with an enemy child. But Ayana raised his hand and responded in a calm, measured tone that seemed to give his brother pause. "This is madness," muttered one of the settlers, his rifle still trained on the Comanche warriors. "Thomas, we need to get your girl out of here and deal with these hostiles." "Nobody is dealing with anybody," Lily said firmly, surprising everyone with the authority in her young voice. "Not until you hear the truth." She turned to face her father fully, knowing that what she said next could determine whether blood would be spilled in this canyon. "Papa, remember what you always told me about judging people by their actions, not their appearance?" Thomas Morgan's jaw tightened, but he nodded slightly. "3 weeks ago, I found Ayana trapped under a boulder with a broken leg and fever, so—" He was barely alive," Lily continued. "I could have run away. I could have told you and let you decide what to do. But Papa, he was dying. And I couldn't watch another living creature die when I had the power to help." The words poured out of her now, 3 weeks of secrecy spilling into the tense air of the canyon. She told them about the long hours she had spent digging him free, nursing his fever, bringing him food and medicine. She explained how he had taught her about plants and animals, how they had learned to communicate despite speaking different languages, and how their friendship had grown into something precious and real. "Every single day," she said, her voice growing stronger, "I chose to help him instead of fear him. And every single day, he proved that he was good and kind and honorable. He never once tried to hurt me. He never once made me afraid. He protected me like a big brother would." Thomas Morgan's rifle slowly lowered as he listened to his daughter's words. He could see the truth in her eyes, hear the conviction in her voice. But years of frontier life had taught him to be suspicious of everything, especially when it came to his family's safety. Runs Like Wind spoke again to Ayana, his tone less harsh than before. Through their exchange, Lily could tell that Ayana was explaining the situation to his brother. The older warrior's expression gradually shifted from suspicion to something that looked like understanding. "She speaks truth," Ayana said suddenly. In careful English, addressing Thomas directly for the first time. "Little Lily, save Ayana life. No, ask for nothing, just help because help was needed." The simplicity and honesty of his words had a powerful effect on everyone in the canyon. Here was a Comanche warrior surrounded by armed enemies, speaking openly about his debt to a white child. "But Papa," Lily continued, sensing that the moment was right to press on, "there's something else you need to understand. Ayana wasn't raiding or fighting when I found him. He was looking for food for his people. His tribe is hungry, Papa. The buffalo herds have moved far away, and they're struggling to survive just like we are." This revelation hit Thomas like a physical blow. In all his talks about hostile Indians and dangerous savages, he had never stopped to consider that they might be fighting for the same basic things his own family fought for every day: food, shelter, and the safety of their loved ones. Ayana seemed to sense that this was a crucial moment. Slowly, carefully, he reached into his medicine pouch and pulled out something that made everyone in the canyon gasp: Lily's grandmother's silver locket, which she had given him as a token of their friendship. He held it up so everyone could see, then spoke in his broken English. "Lily, give Ayana most precious thing, grandmother ... memory, Ayana." He paused, searching for the right words. "Ayana protect with life." The sight of her grandmother's locket in the hands of the Comanche warrior had a profound effect on Thomas Morgan. He remembered how much that locket had meant to Lily, how she had treasured it as her most valuable possession. For her to give it to Ayana meant their friendship was deeper and more meaningful than he had imagined possible. Runs Like Wind stepped forward and spoke directly to Thomas in surprisingly clear English. "Your daughter, brave heart, saved my brother when she could have left him to die. This ... is great honor." The tension in the canyon began to shift. Weapons slowly lowered, as the two groups started to see each other as something other than enemies. But the real breakthrough came when Ayana did something that shocked everyone present. He carefully removed his sacred medicine pouch from around his neck. the most precious possession a Comanche warrior could own, and held it out toward Lily. Speaking in both English and his native language so everyone could understand his intent, he said, "Pitsitua, you are under protection of Ayana and all his people, forever." The gesture was so unprecedented, so profound in its meaning, that even Runs Like Wind stepped back in amazement. A Comanche warrior was placing a white child under the sacred protection of his tribe, something that had never happened before in living memory. Thomas Morgan watched his daughter accept the medicine pouch with the solemnity it deserved, and in that moment something fundamental shifted in his understanding of the world. This wasn't about white settlers versus hostile Indians. This was about human beings recognizing the humanity in each other. "Mr. Morgan," Runs Like Wind said formally, "my brother owes life debt to your daughter. In our way, this debt extends to your family, your people. We do not forget such kindness." Thomas found himself looking at the Comanche warriors with completely different eyes. They weren't savage enemies, they were men worried about their families, just as he was worried about his own family. "What are you proposing?" Thomas asked carefully. Runs Like Wind conferred quickly with his companions, then turned back to face the settlers. "Winter comes soon. Your people and our people, we fight over same land, same resources. But fighting brings death to all sides. Maybe there is different way." Over the next hour, sitting in that hidden canyon where a friendship had bloomed in secret, two groups of men who had been enemies began to talk about peace. Lily translated when needed, helping both sides understand each other's concerns and fears. It wasn't easy. There was mistrust on both sides, anger over past conflicts, and practical concerns about territory and resources. But gradually, the outline of an agreement began to emerge. The Comanche would establish a winter camp in a protected valley about 10 miles from the settlement. In exchange for safe passage and access to trading opportunities, they would help protect the area from hostile raiders from other tribes. The arrangement was unprecedented, but it made sense. Both groups needed security, both needed resources, and both had something valuable to offer the other. As the storm clouds finally opened up and rain began to fall on the canyon, the two groups prepared to return to their respective communities with news of this historic agreement. But before they parted, Ayana approached Thomas Morgan one final time. "Your daughter," he said in his careful English. "She has heart of true warrior. She see person, not enemy. She choose courage over fear, kindness over hatred. You should be very proud." Thomas looked at his 8-year-old daughter, who had somehow orchestrated a peace between two peoples that had been at war for generations. "I am," he said quietly, "more than she ever know." Years passed, and the peace that began in that hidden canyon lasted longer than anyone dared hope. Lily grew up to become a respected translator and mediator, helping to resolve conflicts between the cultures. She married a kind man who understood her unique perspective on the world and raised children who knew that differences in appearance or language didn't make people enemies. Ayana became a great leader among his people, known for his wisdom and his belief that understanding was stronger than warfare. He never forgot the white child who had saved his life, and the two friends met several times over the years at trading gatherings, always greeting each other with the warmth of family. The silver locket and the medicine pouch became symbols of their friendship, passed down through their families as reminders that sometimes the most unlikely connections can change the world. When Lily died at the age of 91, she was buried wearing Ayana's medicine pouch, and when Ayana passed away 3 years later, his grandchildren made sure that Lily's locket was buried with him. Their story became legend in both communities. The tale of an innocent child who rescued a warrior, and how that single act of courage and compassion created ripples that spread far beyond anything either of them could have imagined. It proved that sometimes the smallest acts of kindness can indeed change destinies forever.